Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck for you, and just as a quick heads up, this is not a budget deck, although I do think it should be fairly easy to find substitutes for those expensive cards. But before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers and every single click counts. And today's deck is going to be focused on one of my personal favorite decks, Kynaios and Tiro of Meletis. For 1 red, 1 green, 1 white, and 1 blue, it's a legendary creature, Human Soldier 2/8 with, at the beginning of your end step, draw a card. Each player may put a land card from his or her hand onto the battlefield, then each opponent who didn't draws a card. So when you see this deck out there, it's almost always built as a group hug. I don't hate group hug, but it's not my favorite way to play. So when I decided to build this deck, I set out with one objective in mind. There would be some group hug elements, but what I wanted to do with this deck more than anything else was to make a deck where almost every card you play involves your opponents in some way. I wanted this to be a deck where our opponent is faced with a ton of choices, where they can't really switch off and kind of like do their own thing or be on their cell phone whilst other people are playing. And in this way, I wanted to maximize the political abilities of the deck without necessarily ruining people's day. I wanted this to be a fun experience for everyone at the table so that they would want to play against it more. And I think I mostly succeeded. It's a really fun deck that I really enjoy. It has a lot of gameplay to it. It has a lot of cool things that you can do, a lot of interesting cards that you don't often see. So yeah, this deck is all about player agency, and I hope you like it as much as I do. Starting off, we have Blade Griff Prototype. This is going to be a theme in the deck. It's a card that gives our opponents the choice of what to destroy. In this way, it involves another player, and it also means that you can be like, hey, it's not my fault your thing got blown up. I didn't choose it. Bloom Tender is an excellent card in this deck. It can add up to 4 mana and frequently does. If you have your Bloom Tender out and get your commander out the next turn, suddenly Bloom Tender is tapping for 4 mana, which is great. Combat Calligrapher is a really cool card that subtly encourages people not to attack you. I think it's still very fair though, because when it dies, those people are still going to have those tokens. Edric Spymaster of Trest is another card that indirectly makes your opponents want to attack each other instead of you, so it obviously benefits you more than anyone else, but it still involves other players in the game by giving them meaningful choices to make. Eternal Witness is just a classic staple that's going to allow us to recur something from our graveyard. Vapor Elder is another version of Bloom Tender that is equally good in this deck, except it can also beat down, which is a great ability to have. 4/4 with Vigilance for 3 can be fantastic. Faramir, Prince of Ithilien, involves one of your opponents by giving them the chance to attack you, and if they do, you're going to get one benefit, but if they don't, you're going to get another. So you win either way, but your opponents are engaged. Flump is a nice little wall that can actually allow for some little interactions with your opponents and allow them and you to both draw a card. Forgotten Ancient is very good in this deck. We have a counter sub-theme, and this obviously creates a lot of tension for your opponents because you're going to be giving them a bunch of resources, but whenever they use those resources to play spells, you're going to grow your creatures. Generous Patron works really well with Forgotten Ancient and a bunch of other cards we have in the deck. We can actually use it to draw 2 cards immediately, which is very good, and we have enough ways to put counters on our opponent's creatures that this can be a legit card draw engine. Glunch the Bestower is another really cool card that's going to involve multiple different players. We can use it in such a way that we give advantages to the players that are behind, which will win us their favor, but if we use it correctly, it should almost always benefit us more than our opponents. We can, for example, put counters on our creatures when we have counter doubling effects in play. Keeper of the Accord is going to help keep things fair for us, because if our opponents have more lands or more creatures than us, we are going to be able to catch up. Kibo Uktabi Prince is a really fun and fair card. It's going to give people bananas and gain them some life and give them some mana when they use them, but then if they do use them, we are going to get to grow Kibo, and we can also make somebody sacrifice an artifact when Kibo attacks them, so it's a very interactive card. Ledger Shredder again keeps our opponents in check by making it so that if they play 2 things in a turn, we are going to connive. That's really strong. Managorger Hydra again is going to check for whenever our opponents play stuff. This gets really big, and most people don't usually want to waste a removal spell on Managorger Hydra. Master of Ceremonies is one of my favorite cards in the deck. It's going to allow for so much interaction, and your opponents are going to get stuff, but they're going to have to give you stuff too. So it's a super fun card in this deck. Master of Predicaments involves one of your opponents in a cool mini game where you can get to play something for free. It's not a high power level card, but it's super fun. Neo's Discipline Enforcer works really well with Generous Patron, and it can make it pretty hard to attack us if the creatures have enough counters on them. Orzhov Advocate does a similar thing. It allows opponents to put counters on their creatures, which is a choice, but if they do so, they're not going to be able to attack you until next turn. So it's a bit of a trade-off. Rootweaver Druid is a really cool card where your opponents need to decide whether they search search for 3 lands and put 2 of them into play under their control, usually at least one person is going to take the offer. And once they do, it's very hard for you to come out behind because the other 2 players are probably likely then going to take the offer as well, at which point you're getting 3 lands and they're getting 2 and you're coming out ahead. Scholar of New Horizons is a way to balance cards like Root Weaver Druid, where our opponents are maybe going to end up having more lands than us. With this and all the counters effects we have in the deck, we can ramp really quickly. Selfless Squire is one of my favorite cards in Commander these days. It's so unbelievably good in a battle cruising meta because you can just use it to save yourself from dying if you're getting swung by a massive amount of creatures, and you're going to end up with a very big Selfless Squire as well for the crackback. What's even better though is that it prevents all damage, not all combat damage. So sometimes people just randomly tap out for something like Cracker with Power and you flash this in and it's an absolute blowout. Sun Titan is great for having a little bit of recursion in our deck. Sunscorched Region is another card that's going to discourage your opponents for playing with all of those cards and lands that you're giving them. It's going to keep growing and gaining you life every time they do. Tangled Florahedron is just a nice little bit of ramp. The Council of 4 is a very interesting one because we're almost always going to be drawing 2 cards a turn as long as our commander is out. So we're always going to be activating that draw an extra card trigger, and people are also very likely to double spell with all of the resources you're giving them, so you should end up with quite a lot of tokens and card draw. It's also an absolutely beastly blocker. Our commander as a 2/8 is already annoying. The Council of 4 as a 0/8 is even more annoyance for our opponents to attack us on the ground. Thundering Mightmare kind of does the same thing as all of these other effects that are going to punish our opponents for playing spells, but it's even cooler because we can pair it with another creature. That means we're going to be effectively getting 2 counters whenever an opponent plays a spell. Tidal Barracuda is a symmetrical effect that's not really that symmetrical. It's going to let anybody cast stuff as though it had flash, but during our turn nobody's going to be able to cast stuff. That means that we can operate fairly safely. Windshaper Planetary is another card that I really love lately. Similar to Selfless Squire, it can just be a huge blowout, but it can even be better sometimes because redirecting attacks into someone who is unprepared for them can just knock somebody out of the game. Moving on to sorceries, we have Excavation Technique. This is a great removal spell that forces one of your opponents to make the decisions about what to remove. Guided Passage is a super cool card where you're just going to let one opponent sift through your library and find a creature, a land, and a non-creature, non-land card. So you're basically drawing 3 cards for 3 mana. I will say that you should probably only use this with people who are very familiar with Magic, because otherwise it can take a long time to resolve. Healing Technique is some really good recursion, and you can make some friends at the table by allowing one of your opponents to gain a bunch of life and recur something too. Jailbreak is a really cool reanimation spell for only 2 mana that can hit any sort of permanent, as long as you let one of your opponents get back something that costs the same or more from their graveyard. This is a really cool card that can again make you some friends, but it can just be really good and win you the game in certain situations. Manifold Insight is another really cool card where you're going to end up drawing 3 non-land cards with it, which is a really good rate, but your opponents are going to get to choose what. However, since they're only choosing from the top 10 of your library, this is quite powerful. Promise of Loyalty is a board wipe that allows everyone to keep 1 creature, but your opponents can't attack you with the creature they keep, so it's pretty good. Replication Technique can allow for some really crazy stuff in this deck. We can double up on some crazy permanents, and we're going to allow our opponents to get a copy of something, so again we can make some friends with this card. Just be careful who you choose. Split the Spoils can allow us to return 2 to 3 permanent cards from our graveyard to hand depending on our opponent. If we find somebody that really wants to help, we can split the piles of 0 and 5 and suddenly get back 5 things, but that's pretty unlikely. Tempt with Discovery is another of these cool tempting offer cards. No matter what, you're going to be getting a land, but if your opponents choose to search 2, and why wouldn't they, you can end up getting 3 or 4 lands off of this, which is of course ridiculous. Threats Undetected is a really cool card where you can choose up to 4 creature cards with different powers in your library, and note that what matters is the power and not the mana value, which means that you can make some very interesting searches. After that, your opponent is going to give you 2 of them, so you can kind of make it so you have a bit of redundancy, particularly with +1/+1 counter kind of effects. Moving on to enchantments, we have Burgeoning. This is going to be very good since you're giving your opponents a lot of resources and we're running quite a few lands. Duelist's Heritage is a really cool card that can give one of our creatures double strike, but can also work during your opponent's turn to give their stuff double strike too, as long as it's not attacking you. Evolutionary Escalation I love. We can put 3 counters on a creature we don't control. That's going to trigger Generous Patron, but it's almost always going to help us more with our +1/+1 synergies, and we can also use it politically. Game Preserve is a really goofy card that I have in there that has not yet gone off, but I just like it too much. Feel free to take it out if you don't like it. Basically, at the beginning of your upkeep, every player is going to reveal the top card of their library, and if they are all creature cards, which is pretty unlikely, they all get put into play. This is just kind of like a chaos effect that seems really fun. Love Song of Night and Day is going to allow us to make friends with someone at the table. It's filler, but it's pretty decent filler. Noble Heritage is really good. Our commander is going to allow us to put counters on stuff, and when our opponents take that offer and put counters on their stuff, we gain protection from them and their creatures until the next turn. Again, a very interesting choice for our opponents. Storm of Saruman is a new card that I've just put in and want to test out. I think it seems like a cool effect, and I love doubling up on stuff. Together Forever can provide us some recursion and make it difficult for our opponents to wipe the board. It also makes it good with our board wipes. Having support is also nice. We can use it with Generous Patron to draw some cards, or just get our +1/+1 counter theme going. Wild Evocation is another kind of chaos card where at the beginning of each upkeep, a player is going to reveal a card at random from the hand, and basically they're going to get to either put it into play or cast it for free. So again, if you wanted to increase the power level of the deck a little bit, I would take out this kind of random effect, but it's just so fun. For instance, you have Arcane Denial, which is going to counter something, but it's going to give your opponent something in exchange. Comeuppance is a super cool card that can save you from an Alpha Strike and wipe the board of your opponent's creatures, or it can just win the game sometimes randomly if somebody is using a big X spell to try to kill you, for example. Volcanic Offering is going to basically kill 2 creatures and destroy 2 lands, but your opponents are going to make 2 of those choices. That's a pretty strong card. And your Temple is under attack. It's good board wipe protection that can also be used to make some friends by drawing cards with somebody else. For artifacts, we got Druidic Satchel, which is just a really fun card that I enjoy. It's almost always going to give us some good value, and seeing as we're running quite a lot of lands, this is often just going to ramp us, which is quite good. Finally, for Planeswalkers, we've got the Eternal Wanderer. I've always liked this Planeswalker since it was spoiled. It's just very good by giving us a fairly one-sided board wipe, and if we keep Kynaios and Tiro in play, then we can rebuild pretty quickly after it. So there you have it. That has been my Kynaios and Tiro of Meletis deck tech. What do you think about this one? It's one of my favorite decks to play. I've had this put together for quite a while. Usually I take decks apart quite quickly, but this one has stood the test of time, and I've just kept modifying it. Are there any suggestions you think that would fit well in this deck? Please let me know in the comments section below, because I'm always looking to improve it.
And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.
Woo!